Just beyond our southern border, there is a fascinating culture and supernatural nightmares. This world is a strange one. Not only does Mexico have some amazing food and breathtaking landmarks, it also has ghouls and demons that would make you cancel your Mexico-bound vacation. You might not want to go to Cancun just yet, because there are demons that hunt you in the woods. There are ghosts that haunt the most innocent of places. And there are creatures that are watching you sleep through the glassless windows. It's a wonder that anyone in Mexico can sleep at all, let alone survive. So enjoy these allegedly true Mexican ghost stories. By the way, do you want to live these nightmares? Well, click the card at the top of this video or go to darknessprevails.org/gamefly for a free month of game rentals. You could be playing creepy games like Resident Evil 7, as well as Outlast Trinity coming out on the 25th. So don't miss your chance and give it a try. You'll also be supporting this channel. Thank you. Now, ghosts or not, nothing will keep me from my quesadilla destiny. Number 1. Demon Cries from the Woods. Submitted by 101 Crafts. This is not one of my own stories, but one of my dad's. My dad's family has a lot of ghost stories, and this is one of the more memorable experiences he's told me. To begin, my dad was about 12 years old at the time. He used to live in Mexico on a ranch. Whenever he had to go somewhere to exit the ranch, it took him past thick forests on either side and eventually a small babbling stream. So from there on out, it was nature. He said one night, he and his friends were coming back from a party. It was about 2 in the morning. He was passing a large bush when, out of nowhere, he and his friends began to hear a baby screaming and whining. It sounded like something was tormenting a newborn. My dad and his friends did not expect this, and obviously they were shocked. I mean, hearing a crying baby in the middle of the woods at night, it would be the last thing for anyone to expect. They all assumed that a mother must have abandoned her child in the woods, simply leaving it in the forest to die. It was a cruel but not impossible thing. So they walked closer and closer to the source of the noise, trying to find the poor child, or whatever might be making those cries. But the screaming began to get closer and closer to them. If this was but a baby, it was coming closer. At this point, the group was scared and confused. They were either being stalked by a mother while she carried her child, which made no sense, or this wasn't a person or a baby at all. They began to turn away from the sound slowly, and then they started to jog back to the ranch. But their jogging turned into a full-fledged run, as the crying and screaming somehow gained on them. Now they knew this was impossible. No mother with a child, let alone just a child, would be able to keep up with sprinting youths like this. But those dreadful sounds were closing the distance, and now they seemed to be right behind them. No matter how curious and afraid they got, my father and his friends refused to turn around and see what was really pursuing them. Old legends tell of demons and creatures that would hunt humans by mimicking the sounds of crying babies. And all my father could believe at that point was that what they were hearing was a demon trying to lure them in, disguising its voice with the child's cry. To look into this creature's eyes, they would be doomed. So without ever turning to look, they ran as far and as fast as they could. Soon, my father could see streetlights in the distance. The road was finally near. So the group hit the ground harder, trying their best to outrun the impossibly fast thing behind them. As the road drew closer, the screaming finally died down, and in moments the crying was gone, and they were back on the main road. So using their last bit of energy, they did not stop running until they reached my dad's house. Once there, in terror, they screamed for my father's mom. She did her best to comfort them all, but it took them nearly the rest of the night to actually fall asleep, only to be confronted by nightmare after nightmare. Luckily for them, this never happened again. To this day, my dad still believes that what they heard was a demon hunting them. Number 2. Terrible Creature at My Window. Submitted by HOTARU T. This story took place when I was just 7 years old, and please bear with me, as English is not my first language. Now, I'm from a very quiet and very rural part of Mexico. There, during that time, many of our neighbors, family, and friends were all farmers or livestock breeders. Most of us just lived off the land the best we could. Because of this, I was around a lot of animals all the time. I often played with the chickens or pet the cows, for example. Being so young and surrounded by so many cute animals, it was very fun for me. It was a great time in my life. Many of you might think it sounds dirty or unsophisticated, but it was a place I called home, and I was proud of that. We often took trips from the capital city of my state, Michoacán, to other nearby farmlands for the purpose of visiting, trading, or giving away stuff we had grown or cultivated. Farmers are sharers, after all. It gave me plenty of opportunities to visit other children my age, to make friends, and of course hang out with plenty of other new farm animals. One time, my family visited and stayed a while with another farming family member. We were staying the weekend for some reason or another that I can't recall. Being the optimistic and curious kid I was excited about the little getaway. As per my usual childhood antics, the first chance I got, I ran from the house, which was a small yet cozy and comfortable abode, to the outside backyard area. There, the home was connected to a dirt road, so I was going to set off to see if I could find any other kids to play with. Now, this road and area was all part of the same farm. On this land, there was an old adobe structure that was said to be haunted, along with my relative's small house. This side of the family grew guayaba, a bittersweet fruit, and the other kids and I used to play for hours and hours in those trees. And as I inevitably found some other kids my age, this is what we did for the rest of the evening. It was around 7 that night when it was time for dinner. We ate, visited, and just had a great time until nighttime had completely taken over. Most of my family went to bed, but I stayed up, enjoying the stars in the clear sky from atop one of the guayaba trees. I wasn't very tired after all. I don't think I had burned all my energy just yet. All of a sudden, though, I got this strange sensation. It was like someone's eyes were on me, like someone or something I couldn't see yet was watching me very closely, too closely, and something told me that it was coming from that old adobe house. Maybe I was just reminded that the place was said to be haunted, so maybe I just assumed that that's where the feeling was coming from. Anyway, I climbed down the tree I was lying in, and I began my walk over to the house. On the way there, though, one of my family's horses began to act erratic and panicky, as if it was searching for someone or something, or maybe it was awaiting something. All the while the horse was behaving odd, it would not stop staring at me. It was the strangest thing, and it really creeped me out. I had spent my whole life up to that point surrounded by animals, and not once did I ever see a horse behave this way. And by then, I lost a bit too much of my confidence to continue to the adobe haunted house. So I began my walk back to my family's place, deciding to call it a night. When I got in, everyone else was asleep, so I crawled slowly into bed with my mother. We had to share a bed, as the house only had 3 rooms, and there were 8 people altogether residing there that weekend, so a few of us had to be cramped together. I didn't mind, though. The best place to be in the world when you're scared is by your mother, after all. The room my mother and I were sleeping in, it was one of the few rooms with a window. This window was on the side of the house overlooking the farm and fields and a nearby forest. It really gives you something nice to view as you fall asleep into a well-needed rest. The window had an old aluminum frame for protection from the elements, and I should note that the farm itself did have a metal fence keeping the animals in, and maybe some animals out. Eventually, I dozed off, only to be suddenly jolted awake by the need to use the bathroom. I must have been asleep for a few hours before waking up. I was drop-dead tired, so in the dark and half asleep, I stumbled my way through the house, trying desperately to remember where my relative's bathroom was. Everything was pitch black, though. It was hard to see anything beyond my own nose. It took me longer than I was comfortable with, but I did finally find the bathroom. I did my business, and directly after that, I began to feel the same eerie sensation of something watching me. The same sensation I was feeling when I was near the adobe house. I felt like something was hunting me. Chills ran up and down my back. Even inside the house, surrounded by family, I was filled with dread by some unseen force. This terrified me. I didn't know what was happening. So as fast as I could, I made my way back to the room, back to bed with my sleeping mother. But as soon as I stepped through the doorway, as the only source of light came from the moon and stars shining through the window, I could barely clearly see something huge standing just outside the window. There they were, two of the biggest, most horrible-looking red eyes I could ever have imagined. They were like portals to the underworld, eyes red like freshly drawn blood, red like carnage and hate. I could not will myself to move. I was frozen to the spot, my eyes locked on this horrible creature that was just standing there outside the window. I couldn't even force myself to scream. My breathing seemed to stutter as I tried desperately to draw my next breath. Suddenly, this monster outside let out a slow, rumbling growl. It sounded like a big, angry dog snarling while holding something between its teeth. At this point, I was shaking. I was so scared. I don't know how long I stood there, just staring back at this thing. But this hellish moment seemed to last forever. Sure enough, though, the creature breathed visible breath against the window before stepping hard away. Then I watched it walk off into the dark distance. As soon as I was sure it was gone, I covered the window with the spare blanket, and I cowered helplessly next to my sleeping mother. I wanted so bad to wake her, but I didn't. Needless to say, I did not sleep one bit that night. The next day, I spent most of my time trying to convince myself that this was just all a nightmare. Even still, I hope beyond hope that what I saw was simply just a terrible and very, very realistic dream. But the thing is, I clearly remember waking up. I remember the urge to go to the bathroom and the difficulty finding it. And I very much remember staying up all those long hours after seeing that beast at the window. That very same day, during the afternoon, several of the geese were found killed. I saw the aftermath of the attack, the blood and the feathers all scattered around in a frenzy. I also saw the bodies of the geese. Each of them had 2 large puncture wounds in their necks, and the poor creatures were light and hollow of blood. Better yet, the very same trees that we kids were just playing on the previous day, there were massive claw marks raking down their trunks several feet up. We even found feathers near part of the fence, the part of the fence closest to our bedroom window that night, and where the feathers were, the fence had been busted open. Because of everything that happened, I developed a fear of the dark, and I had constant nightmares for several years. Can you imagine that? A kid who grew up on farms and with nature, without a worry in the world, never even giving the dark a second thought, now petrified at the thought of bedtime and dark windows. I suddenly found it difficult to go outside at all. Even now, I sometimes have nightmares of vivid memories of this creature. I can still hear its growl, see its red, glaring eyes. This scar is so deep that now, as a 27-year-old man, I sleep with covered windows with the lights on. Number 3. TOLLY. Submitted by KALE. My name is Moni. Before I begin, I want to say that this is a story from 2 perspectives, by me and my friend who's like my brother. But let's catch you up first. I wasn't born in Mexico, but me, my mom, and my friend KALE went to Mexico when I was a child. So let's start. Me, my mom, and KALE, who was 10 at the time, went to Mexico. KALE was very close to my family, and when my mom needed to go down there for a visit, she offered to take KALE, seeing that me and him were like siblings. When we got down there, we checked into a place that KALE said was like a very pretty house. It was like a Hawaiian house, but in Mexico, right next to the beach and rolling waves. Now this is where Kale's perspective comes in. Moni was a very curious child. When her mother was busy, I would take her down to the beach. I would show her the shoreline, show her the animals that were there. Sometimes we even went for a swim. I was 10 at the time, and her mother thought that I was okay to look after her. Even now, as I'm 24, she's still like my sister. Now, even though this was a beautiful place we were staying at, there's always people that want to hurt such an innocent little girl. Several times I caught men talking to her, adult men, that gave off awkward and bad vibes, men that I thought were trying to hurt her. She was only 3, so I couldn't blame her, but I would always rush in to save her, as she didn't know any better. Besides that, I would constantly find Moni running to the ocean anytime she could. You see, we often left that back door open so that the fresh air could come in, letting out the musty air of the house. I would catch her and get onto her, saying that she could drown if she went into the ocean by herself. And when I asked her why she did this, why she would try to run out into the ocean like that, she said, "Because Tolly is doing it too. She's calling me to join her." She would just giggle and smile as she said it. "Who is Tolly?" I would ask. And she would reply, "Tolly is my friend." She then threw her hands up and hugged me. "She's waiting over there in the water. Don't you see her?" She then pointed, but there was no one there. I looked around for any small child or anything like that, but there was nothing. Luckily, our week came to an end soon enough. A day or two before we were back, Kale told me that he couldn't find me one day in the house, and he rushed outside fearing that I had finally drowned out in the water somewhere. Thankfully, I didn't, and I'm here to tell you this story. Kale tells me that he still wonders what was beckoning me into the water. Number 4. The Boy on the Mexican Playground. Submitted by Mexican Girl 10. This experience happened when I was visiting friends and family in Mexico. I was 7 years old at the time, and while we were there, we were staying with my aunt. Since I was so young, I got scared easily, and my cousins were aware of this. So they told me an old legend of the town. The legend of a boy that was once kidnapped at the nearby park, and the next morning he was found stabbed and his hands were cut off. "Buenas noches," said my cousin, which means good night. But he was trying to scare me. I thought they were lying, that they were making this up just to scare me. But obviously this terrified me. That very same night, as I lie in bed struggling to even close my eyes, let alone sleep at all, I suddenly heard the sound of a child giggling. It was coming from my cousin's room. Trying not to move my body too much out of fear, I slowly peered over in that direction, and I saw my cousins teasing their youngest sister, Rosa. I felt relieved that it wasn't the little boy from the story, but as I continued to watch, things got weird. Eventually, Rosa was standing next to a nearby window, trying to ignore her typical older brothers. I watched as she glanced outside, and the expression on her face instantly changed. It transformed. One moment she seemed tired and frustrated, and the next her mouth was wide open, her eyes became glossy with tears, and she looked terrified. All too late did I remember that that window had a distant view of the very playground that my cousins had told me the story about, the playground where that boy had been found mutilated. In fearful curiosity, she started to open the curtains to get a better view, and for a moment she looked more confused than anything. But in mere seconds, all I could see on her face was fear. She then ran and screamed, "El niño! El niño!" which means the boy. Then she ran to her bedroom, crying all the way. My cousins tried reasoning with her, saying that there's no boy out there, but she didn't stop crying. Scared by this sight, I was still curious myself. I was still a kid, you know? I thought maybe it was nothing. Maybe when I opened the curtains up for a clearer view, there would be nothing there. But I was wrong. When I opened those curtains and looked out into the distance, I saw a boy on the swings. He was pale and motionless, his head slumped over, And his hands were missing. But that's not the creepiest part of all, because the boy slumped overhead was facing the house. It was facing me. Black eyes were staring into mine. That was the last time we stayed at their house when we visited. I couldn't be more glad. Even still, the vision remains in my head, and the nightmares have not gone away. Number 5. Demon Guardian. Submitted by Angel VEGA. I'm a Mexican citizen at the moment. I was raised in Mesa, Arizona before we moved down here, and since then my family has had many encounters with the paranormal, and we've even had family members who practice black magic, but I wasn't sure if I believed all that. As for my experience, I was 8 years old when I used to live in a 2-story house with my mom, my stepdad, and my brother in a very quiet neighborhood. From what I remember, I would never really notice strange things happen in the house. Everything seemed normal to me, despite my paranormal-loving family. One day I heard my brother talking to my mom about going to Six Flags with a friend and his friends. My mom was a little hesitant, but he finally gave him permission. But that would mean I would have to sleep alone in my room until he came back. The first night I went to sleep around 9 as usual, and at about 2 in the morning I woke up to a strange sound. It sounded like someone was snoring, but doing it intentionally, as if they were trying to be obnoxious and wake me up. I rubbed my eyes, and I couldn't see much in the room as it was pitch black. I looked in the direction the noise was coming from, and I saw from the little lighting the moon gave off something I'll never forget. The moment I saw it, my eyes widened, and I crawled away from it. I never felt goosebumps cover my whole body like that, because there before me, on the other side of the room, sat a small black creature with horns, similar to a dog, but much, much worse. It was staring at me, and it seemed like hours passed before I finally gathered the courage to run and turn on the light. And the moment I did, the entity disappeared. I was very scared, but something inside me seemed to say that this creature only looked scary, that it had no intention of harming me. I never thought I'd be the one saying or thinking something like that. Then again, I never not once thought I'd ever see a demon in my room at night. Maybe my family was rubbing off on me. I'm now 17, and I live in Nogales, Sonora, Mexico. And sometimes I swear I see the same creature near me as I walk home from work at around midnight. But if I do, it only seems to watch me from a distance. The vibe the entity gives off is somehow positive, even though the occasional sight of it still freaks me out. I believe it may be linked to my family's past, as my great-grandfather himself went crazy a long time ago. Apparently, he kept telling everyone that he could see the devil, that it would follow him home. Well, who knows? Maybe I'm going crazy too. And number 6. What I Saw on a Thursday Night. Submitted by DIMITRI. I live in a heavily populated area on the border of Mexico. I was born of 2 Nicaraguan immigrants who came to the United States both in the late 90s. Now, being born of migrants from a Central American country, I was bound to hear about their folklore and things of the such. One of these happened to be the duende. As a child, my parents warned me about this thing. If I was bad, or if I wandered off too far away from them, the duende would find me. I thought it was just some sort of scare tactic, things that parents do to make you obey them. This happened several weeks ago, at 10 o'clock or so at night. I had recently taken a shower, and I ate my dinner. Then I was off to bed to finally get my rest for the next day, which was a school day. I'm a pretty tall and lanky guy, and my feet usually hang a bit off the end of my bed. As per usual, I got to my room and my cat ran in after me. My cat loves to sleep next to me, as I must be a pretty warm guy. I had my phone near my bed, as I had been using it to text a couple of friends before I fell asleep. I was texting a close friend of mine when I suddenly heard my floorboard creaking. If this had been earlier in the day, I would usually pass this off as my home being rickety and old. But at night, I had a very paranoid instinct to notice everything, every little sound and movement too. I put my hand to my side and I felt my cat's scruffy back. I turned off my phone and tried to drift off to sleep, as it was way past the time I would usually fall asleep at. The next thing I know, I wake up to see my cat hissing and angry at something, making that meow sound, the sound cats make when they are disturbed or they see another cat. I felt my side and I felt that it was now empty. I quickly took my phone and proceeded to turn the light on. What I saw next, I couldn't really process at the time. When the light came on, I could see my deep black cat's fur, and near it was a small figure, standing maybe a foot or so tall. I quickly scrambled up and curled my knees up to my chest, scared at the sight. I felt cold sweat, and I stayed awake for the rest of the night. Eventually, I felt the warm sunshine coming in from the window, which wasn't right because I always kept my blinds closed, and my parents never opened them themselves. But there they were, open, as was one of my windows, as if something had crawled into my room. I had gotten up and closed the window, but I left the blinds open so I could see. Hesitantly and creeped out, I put my clothes and my backpack on, then I left for school. I haven't told anyone about this, mostly because I simply don't have an explanation as to what I saw. The creature in my room may have been the duende my parents used to tell me about, but that explanation does not seem sufficient enough. As long as whatever it was doesn't visit me again, I'll be okay. Mexico gets a bad rap due to the rampant drug-related crimes and dangerous underworld that seems to float to the public surface all too often. But every country has its darkness under the hood. You can't deny the beauty and depth of the Mexican culture. As with any culture though, it has its own unique ghosts and creatures that you haven't seen or heard of before. As a tourist or a resident, you'll have to face off with the local horrors if you want to reside there. But can you survive the night? Can you ignore those glowing red eyes in the window? Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to give darknessprevails.org/gamefly a try. It's free for a month. Thanks.